Let's jump into our fourth history lesson. Make sure that you have your notes to fill in as we are going along. If you don't have that, pause and find that paperwork. If you didn't pick it up at school, I've attached it to the portal. So let's start talking about this thing called free enterprise. The later half of the 19th century was this great age of free enterprise, capitalism in the United States. We see this huge growth of capitalism in the United States during the latter half of the 19th century, which is the late 1800s. So here's the thing. Capitalism is an economic system in which individuals are free to follow their economic pursuits as they see fit. That's a lot of words to mean that in a capitalist society, people can start their own jobs, they can choose where they work, they're free to follow the jobs that they want to follow. If it wasn't for capitalism, you wouldn't be at this school. There would probably be no private schools open. Everything would be much more controlled. In a capitalist society, we have the freedom to pursue the jobs and the things that we want to do. And the book that I'm using has this statement in it. It is the only economic system consistent with personal liberty and responsibility. It's also called free enterprise because individuals are free to make something of themselves if he has the enterprise, which means energy and initiative. So here's the thing. In a capitalist society, you can wake up one day and decide you want to start a business, and you are free to do that. And you are free to, if you have the energy and the initiative, you have the willpower to do it. In a capitalist society, you are free to pursue that and to build a business of your choosing. The nation, after the Civil War, remember, this is after the Civil War is where we are right now in our history timeline. At this point, the nation is becoming more and more prosperous through this post-Civil War era. And there's a couple of reasons why the industry sort of takes this giant leap, or the industrial advancement happens during this time period. Number one, there are new inventions and discoveries being made. There's a phrase that says, necessity is the mother of invention. So as there's these needs that are there, new inventions and discoveries are being made. And here's the reality of the situation. As industry begins to expand and more discoveries are made, new products are being created. Goods can now be manufactured more cheaply, for more efficiently, and with higher quality. So let's take an example. Pre-Civil War, pre-industry, if I needed a dress, I had to find the cloth, figure out a pattern, cut it out, and then I had to sit by hand and I had to stitch by stitch by stitch of this dress. Would have taken a very, very long time. And now with things like sewing machines and these factories coming into play, I can now get a made dress that is being able to be made much, much quicker. If I'm a seamstress pre-Civil War doing this by hand, it would take me days and days to create a dress. I would have to charge a certain amount, and I could only do one at a time. And now as I'm building this enterprise, I can make multiple dresses in a much faster manner, and therefore I can make more money. Therefore I can make more of the products. I can make them cheaper because it doesn't take as much time. And because of the machinery, I'm making it more efficiently and a lot of times with a higher quality. Another reason is we live in an area with these natural resources. America had been blessed with an abundance of fertile land. We can grow a ton of things. We have massive amounts of clean water, things like oil and coal and iron ore, and all of these natural resources that are necessary for industrialization are present in our land, and therefore we have these resources to grow our industry. And then another reason, we have a large labor supply. So remember, post-Civil War, after the Civil War, immigrants coming in at a very high rate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, and Native Americans who are moving from farmlands into the cities are creating a supply, a quick and easy supply of industrial workers to grow these manufacturing companies and these factories that aid in the industrial in this growth. I don't know what I was trying to say, but there you go. Now, not everyone may agree with me on this, but I think that there were two additional reasons that was kind of working behind the scenes that helped advance America at this time so much. I think the first one is what we call the Protestant work ethic. So I think that one of the factors in America's rise to prosperity was this thing called the Protestant work ethic, and it really began to take root in the United States. Here's the thing: the majority of Americans looked upon the ability to work as a blessing, and they began to view labor as a dignified way to fulfill their responsibility, and in the process, they believed that it was glorifying to the Lord. There's a section in Nehemiah that talks about, the verse says, the people had a mind to work. That there's a whole group of people who believed that through their work, everything that they were doing, it was fulfilling their life's purpose and their responsibility of glorifying the Lord, which really changed the attitude and the mindset toward going to work every day. And the second thing, and capitalism gets beat up quite a bit these days, but I think that this idea of free enterprise or capitalism, the government is spurring on this individual initiative. when they're allowing the free market to take course, it really begins to encourage this idea of working for yourself. People who can create and do the things that they want to do begin to work harder and more efficiently and more effectively. And so you have is this free market system begins to really bring, and I think this is probably a true statement, the greatest wealth and luxury for the greatest number that the world has ever known. I believe that people get up and work harder when they see the benefit of that hard work. If I can get up every day and go to a job that I enjoy, for the most part, make a paycheck that I get to bring home a large percentage of, I am going to work harder and better than if I am assigned a job that I don't enjoy and I don't get to reap the benefits of that. So I believe Protestant work ethic and this economic freedom are two underlying things that really helped create America's prosperity during this time period. Next, we're going to talk about the rise of big business. So the first place we're going to start is the steel industry. The era following the Civil War saw the rise of big business, of these corporations just growing into these giant businesses. One industry that saw tremendous growth during this time period were the iron and the steel industry. In colonial days in America, we had a large development. We had a pretty large iron industry. Iron production then began to kind of increase throughout the 19th century. However, steel production is a little bit different. Steel's a refined form of iron. It's less brittle and it's much tougher than ordinary cast iron. So before 1860, steel was so expensive to produce, it was reserved for the finest tools and the finest cutlery. But you have, during this time period, 1850s, this man, two men named William Kelly and Henry Bessemer, began sort of working independently from each other, but sort of at the same time had this discovery that oh, sorry, I kind of got ahead of myself. I'm sorry. The steel industry began to grow by the turn of the 20th century. America was the world's leading steel producer. This dramatic increase was largely the result of a new method to produce large quantities cheaper. Here's what these two guys, working independently of each other, but sort of releasing at the same time, discovered. They discovered that if you put a blast of hot air on molten iron, that their impurities could be removed, and the large quantities of steel can now be produced at a much smaller cost. That's where we get the blast furnace from. And this ability to produce more steel led to a higher production, higher sales. Now, let's talk about this guy named Andrew Carnegie. And this guy, Andrew Carnegie, much of America's steel business soon came under the control of this young entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a person who sort of takes on, they organize, they manage this business undertaking. Typically, an entrepreneur is willing to risk failing for a chance of success. And a lot of our nation's financial growth can be credited to brave, I mean, it really is. It takes a lot of courage to become an entrepreneur because you could lose a whole lot of your finances. So he sort of begins to be the one that takes control of the steel business. He was born of Scottish immigrants, very poor. He started his career when he was 13 years old, and he went to work as what's called a bobbin boy in a cotton mill. And these were really dangerous jobs. They have bobbins up and down the walls, and they would hire young kids. Bobbin is what you wrap thread around, and so when a bobbin would come off or break or the thread would snap, these kids were told to climb up the wall with all of these bobbins running and repair the issues. I've read stories of girls' hair getting caught in these machines and like literally ripping their part of their scalp off, and it was really, really a tough situation to be in. But he started working at the age of 13. He made $1.20 a week. So if you ever think you're not getting paid enough, just remember it could be worse. He worked as a telegraph messenger, a telegraph operator. He became an assistant to a higher up guy at a Pennsylvania railroad. By the time he was in his mid-20s, he was a railroad executive. So this guy really worked his way from the bottom all the way to the top. He then began to sort of step into the building of iron bridges, which soon led him into the manufacturing of iron. And sort of by the early 1800s, he had joined forces with this guy named Henry C. Frick, and their terrible last name. And they formed a company together. These guys became the leading producer of iron and steel in the United States. He was a businessman. He had seen businesses become ruined by competitors who controlled sources of raw materials, by railroads that charged lower rates to larger businesses, and he really set out to not fail. He began to watch businesses around him and learn what made them fail, and he began to walk in the path that he had seen to know what not to do, basically. Soon, his company owned coal and iron mines. They owned their own steamships. They owned barges and railroads. And he began to buy out related businesses. It kind of became, I'm not sure monopoly is the right word, but he began to not just own the steel industry, but even the items that he needed to ship his manufactured goods and all of these things. As, of course, the business grows, his profit multiplies. In 1893, a depression year, the company's profits totaled $3 million. In 1990, they reached $40 million, and Carnegie's personal share that year was $25 million. Now, $25 million is a huge amount of money, but I Googled it. Of course, I'm not quite positive how accurate Google is, but what Google told me is if I take $25 million in 1990, its value today is $56 billion. This guy started off as a child of some poor Scottish immigrants and became ridiculously wealthy. Now, in 1901, Carnegie sold his holdings of this investment to a man named J.P. Morgan, and he had a company called J.P. Morgan and Company, and Morgan took this over, ultimately formed what's called the United States Steel Corporation. Now, Andrew Carnegie became very popular for his, what's the word I'm looking for? Being a philanthropist. He gave away a whole lot of money. He stated, and he fully believed that wealthy men should voluntarily distribute their surplus for the general good of mankind. He really genuinely believed if you are blessed with a surplus of finances that you should be donating to those around you to help them out. He helped fund the Carnegie Institute of Technology, Carnegie Mellon University, the Carnegie Institution of Washington. He became a major benefactor to Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute, and he was perhaps the best remembered for helping finance the founding of public libraries so that common people could have access to books, not only in America, but even in England. Now, let's take a second to talk about J.P. Morgan. John Pierpont Morgan was America's wealthiest financier for the 19th century. Ultimately was the founder of one of the most influential banking houses in the world. And the thing is, of course, people were different today than they were back then. He was a believer, and he really kind of had the same mindset as Carnegie, in that he really wanted to help those around him. He helped finance the American Telegraph and telephone. He helped with General Electric. There was a minor depression, nothing like the Great Depression, but in 1893, there was a panic that hit and caused a depression. Morgan himself helped to personally finance many railroad companies that busted. He helped in 1895, Morgan and some associates ended a shortage in the United States Treasury by sort of helping fund this $62 million government bond. He personally helped several banks close by lending the banks money to keep America from spiraling into a massive depression. He was a Christian, and he really believed that he was questioned later on in his life about the most important thing, and he said the most important thing is a man's character. He said, money cannot buy it. Character is the basis of any prosperity. Now let's talk about oil. So we've had the steel industry, it's booming, and now oil. There's this guy named John D. Rockefeller, and let's see. He is sort of this very ambitious young man who really begins to see the potential of oil before a whole lot of people could see it. He's about the age of 16. He is working as a store clerk, making about 50 cents a day. His ability to work hard won him like this steady stream of promotions. He's going to work, he's working hard, he's completing his tasks, and he just gets promoted one after another. He is really good at saving his money, and very quickly he goes into business for himself. And in 1862, about the age of 23 years old, he goes into business. He and his younger brother, along with a couple of other people, start this thing called the Standard Oil Company. They're in Ohio. He becomes the president. When they are established, when they first start this oil refinery, it is one of the largest in the country. It's producing about 600 barrels of oil a day. By 1873, that should be a comma, not say comma, this company controlled 30% of the nation's oil refining capacity. And that should be a period, not say period. Your notes don't have that. I corrected it first. And here's the thing. In less than a decade, so in less than 10 years, this company goes from making 30% of the nation's oil, or refining 30%, to controlling 90%. Now, the reality is John D. Rockefeller was a phenomenal philanthropist, which means he was giving a whole lot of his funds away. The same attitude that Carnegie had and that J.P. Morgan had, he has as well. And here's the thing. When John D. Rockefeller retires, near the 1890s, he has an estimated set of assets for about $1 billion. Now, here's the thing. After he retires, he really devotes himself completely to this idea of philanthropy, to helping others around him. He and his sons ultimately make these contributions totaling $3 million, which means he is giving a very large portion of what he is making, if not, by this point in his life, anything that he's bringing in. And that is when capitalism works, is when the honest men and women are working hard, building businesses, and being honest with it. Now, this idea of one company controlling 90% of a resource is but it's one of those negative connotations that comes alongside of capitalism. This idea of complete control by one person or one group, one entity. And so capitalism works. We can see that when we study through history. We're going to come back and visit that as we go through other parts of U.S. history. But there is a downside. There is a negative side that comes along with a misuse of this, which the reality is anything misused leads to bad things. Listen, I had an uncle who almost died from a lack of salt. Right? He went on this salt-free diet and began drinking so much water that his body didn't have enough certain supplements inside and minerals, and he almost died. So too much water was the diagnosis because it caused his body to not have enough minerals. So anything, even good things, when misused, can cause problems. You're going to have an assignment, and we're going to create a class group on Khan Academy. So you're going to need to go to khanacademy.org. You're going to need to create an account. From there, you can click Khan Student, and then you're going to have your home base there. Your class is U.S. History. It's going to be on the left side of your screen. You're going to click the assignment there. And as you go through this assignment, we sort of did one of these the other day that I printed out for you, but I just discovered that I can have you guys do it completely online, which you're already doing, and just complete the assignments there. I'm going to add each of you. I'm going to probably be reaching out to several of you individually once I set up your account. If it's a reading assignment, it will say that it's completed. If you complete it, it's an instant 100. Any quizzes will be graded. Now, from what I can tell, if you do not like the grade of your quiz, you can go in and redo it. So we're going to work through this khanacademy.org. We won't be using it every week, but we will use it a lot because it has some really good information in it. I really like the way this website puts some things together. So pay attention to those text messages in our GroupMe section or GroupMe app, and then I will be texting some of you to verify your account is set up. So your homework is going to be, number one, make sure you fill in all your notes. That is a grade, okay? That we're not meeting face to face, so we don't have discussions. We don't have in-class assignments. So your notes that you're filling in are your in-class grades. And then you're going to have I think one question, maybe two questions on that note sheet. I think the assignment is to write a one-paragraph essay on, I guess one paragraph isn't an essay, but one paragraph on Carnegie, a paragraph on Rockefeller, and then a paragraph on Morgan, and then to click into your Khan Academy account and complete that assignment. So I will get all that information to you, and that is the end of this lecture for the week.